I still remember the way the cold felt that night, a sharp and merciless kind of cold that crawled under my clothes and settled deep beneath my skin. It was a little after 11 p.m., and I was halfway through another 12-hour shift at the 24-hour convenience store off Highway 89. My name is Michael Reyes. I was 33 years old back then, a single father trying to hold my life together one long Montana winter at a time. The neon store sign buzzed weakly above me each time I stepped outside to empty the trash or check the ice freezer, casting a blue glow onto the falling snow. The temperature hovered around 15 degrees below zero, and the wind carried thin sheets of snow that moved like ghosts across the parking lot. On nights like that, the world felt deserted, as if everyone with warmth and a home had disappeared into some other universe entirely. But he was always there, the old man. The one everyone avoided, the one nobody looked at for more than a second. He sat hunched beside the vending machine just a few feet from the entrance where the fluorescent light spilled out but never quite reached him. His coat was the color of old ashes, worn thin in places where stuffing poked through. His beard was white and uneven, and his hands trembled as he rubbed them together for warmth. His name, I would later learn, was Elias. But to the people who passed him, he wasn't anyone. 2 teenagers walked by that night, jackets too thin for the weather, laughing at something on a phone. When they saw him, one muttered, "He's not even worth $1." They quickened their pace as if being near him was dangerous. A familiar frustration twisted inside me. I had seen plenty of people treat the homeless like an inconvenience, something to step over and forget, but hearing it spoken out loud like that hit differently. Back inside, I poured a fresh cup of coffee and wrapped a leftover turkey sandwich in foil. I told myself I had extras because the shipment had come in late, but part of me knew I'd prepared more than usual on purpose. I pushed the door open and stepped into the night, the wind slicing straight through my sweatshirt. My breath floated upward in thick white clouds. When I reached him, his pale blue eyes lifted to meet mine. There was a depth in them, a kind of sorrow layered over years and years of a loss heavy enough that I forgot whatever I was about to say. I held out the coffee. "Here, sir. It's hot. Warm your hands." He stared for a moment before slowly reaching out. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt just how cold he really was. He cupped the coffee close to his chest like it was precious. I didn't think twice. I unwound the scarf from around my neck, the same scarf I'd worn through 6 winters, and wrapped it gently around his. He stiffened, surprised, then let out a slow breath as if a small piece of the night's cruelty had lifted from his shoulders. After a long silence, he whispered, "Why? Why are you kind to me?" His voice was so thin it nearly vanished into the wind. I swallowed hard, because everyone deserves warmth, even on a night like this. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe gratitude, maybe memory. I didn't know then how much that moment meant. 3 days later, everything changed. I was restocking the beverage cooler when a black SUV rolled into the parking lot, its headlights slicing through the blowing snow. 3 men in long coats stepped out, followed by 2 security guards with earpieces. Every customer stopped talking as they walked in the tension thick enough to feel. The tallest man looked straight at me and asked, "Are you Michael Reyes? We need to speak to you about Mr. Elias Mercer." Mercer. I froze. Elias had a last name. I had no idea that one small act of kindness would change my entire life. My name is Michael Reyes, and before everything changed, my life felt like a long stretch of cold nights and half-lived days. I used to think that struggle was just the price of being alive, something built into the bones of people like me. I was 33, worn down, held together with caffeine and determination, and doing everything I could to raise my 7-year-old daughter, Ava. She was the only bright spot in a life that had grown dim around the edges. Ava had been diagnosed with asthma when she was 3, the kind that turned a simple cold into a midnight emergency. Ever since then, my world revolved around inhalers, insurance calls, and making sure I worked shifts that let me be home when she needed me. Her mother had left when Ava was barely 2. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a note beside a sink full of unwashed bottles. She wrote that she needed a different life, that she couldn't handle the pressure anymore, and that I was strong enough to do this alone. Maybe she thought it was a compliment. It didn't feel like one. I quit my job at the auto shop the same week because the hours were unpredictable. I needed steadiness. I needed to be able to pick Ava up from school, take her to appointments, and be awake at night if she had trouble breathing. That's how I ended up taking the night shift at the convenience store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was reliable, and reliability was a luxury I couldn't afford to turn down. The pay was barely enough to keep us afloat. Rent, on the small duplex we lived in, took most of my check. Heating bills in Montana winters could cripple a family even without medical expenses. Then came the hospital visits, the medication costs, the overdue notices. I learned quickly that if I wanted to survive, I'd have to stretch every dollar like it was elastic. Some months even, that wasn't enough. Most nights I ate whatever expired first in the store's back room. Stale muffins, bruised bananas, sandwiches made hours earlier. I drank coffee so watered down it hardly tasted like anything. Sleep wasn't something I got so much as something I caught in 10-minute bursts on the bus ride home. But I kept going because Ava needed me. She was the reason I woke up worked worried, pushed through exhaustion, and kept believing that life wasn't done with me. She had big brown eyes that always seemed to ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Even on the hardest days, she'd grin at me and say, "Daddy, you look tired. You want me to draw you something happy?" Then she'd hand me a picture of the two of us standing under a rainbow. She believed in color, even when all I saw was gray. Every day at the store brought new challenges. Drunk customers who slurred their words and fumbled their money. Angry drivers who blamed me for the gas pump being slow. People who treated me like part of the counter something to tap on when they wanted attention. Others acted as if they were doing charity by not yelling. Still, I tried to be kind. My father, before he passed, used to tell me, "Son, kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it can save a life." He said it while teaching me how to fix things. Sinks, cars, fences, people's faith in themselves. He believed the world could be softened by small actions, and I held on to those words even when life hardened around me. But there were nights when kindness felt impossible. Nights when exhaustion won. Nights when I wondered how much longer I could keep my head above water. One evening, after a long shift, I stepped outside only to find the car refusing to start. The engine coughed twice and fell silent. I banged my forehead gently against the steering wheel, letting out a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deep. Snow was already falling in thick flakes. Ava was home with the neighbor, but her breathing had been tight earlier. If anything happened, I wouldn't reach her in time. I grabbed my coat and started running down the icy sidewalk toward home, slipping more than once. By the time I reached our door, my lungs were on fire. When I walked in, I found Ava curled up on the couch, coughing, clutching her inhaler. The neighbor looked helpless. I scooped Ava into my arms and whispered, "Daddy's here," but inside I felt like I was breaking apart. That night, after she finally fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the pile of unopened bills. A final notice for electricity. Another for medical payments. A red slip from the landlord reminding me rent was late again. I put my head in my hands, feeling that familiar weight settle onto me. A mixture of fear, failure, and determination all tangled together. I didn't know how much longer I could take the strain. What I didn't know was that just a few blocks away, a homeless old man was sitting under the harsh glow of a vending machine, and the smallest act of kindness between strangers would soon connect our lives in ways I never could have imagined. The first time I truly noticed him, really noticed him, was on a night when the wind howled so loudly against the metal awning that the whole storefront seemed to vibrate. I stepped outside to toss a bag of trash into the dumpster, pulling my thin jacket tighter as the cold bit into my neck. That was when my eyes drifted to the vending machine near the edge of the parking lot, its flickering neon blue glow cutting a crooked rectangle into the snow. And there he was, sitting in the exact same spot he always took, as if the concrete belonged to him. The old man whom I would later know as Elias. He sat, hunched over, shoulders curled inward like he was bracing himself against memories rather than the cold. His hands were cupped together, not for prayer, but to cradle the warmth from a small disposable cup I must have given him earlier. What struck me wasn't the way he looked, but the way he didn't look at anything. Not at the passing cars, not at his own shoes, not even at the snow landing on his sleeves. His eyes were open but distant, like he was watching something only he could see. He never asked for money, never held up a sign, never spoke unless spoken to. Most homeless people outside the store had routines, voices, strategies to get a few dollars. But not him. He simply existed. Silent, steady, invisible in plain sight. Customers avoided him out of habit. Middle-aged couples pulled their coats tighter and turned away. A businessman once muttered another one. "This town is falling apart." I remember wanting to say something back, something about compassion, but exhaustion swallowed the words. Yet, despite everything I carried on my shoulders, I couldn't walk past Elias without offering something. Maybe it was the way he never looked entitled. Maybe it was the loneliness in his posture. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked. So every night I brought him something small, a hot drink, a half-price sandwich, a pair of gloves someone left behind in the lost and found bin. At first, he reacted the same way each time, a small nod. Eyes lowered, hands trembling as he reached out. But after a week or two, something shifted. The nod grew slightly deeper. His fingers lingered for an extra second on the cup. He still never spoke, but I could feel our silent ritual forming something familiar in a life that otherwise felt like a storm without shelter. One night, the snow fell so heavily it blurred the streetlights into glowing halos. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the wind whipped so violently I had to lean forward to stay balanced. I stepped outside during a break, and my heart lurched when I didn't see him. His usual spot by the vending machine was empty except for the faint outline of where his body must have pressed into the snow earlier. The coffee cup I'd given him lay tipped over, steam still drifting upward. That meant he hadn't been gone long. Without thinking, I walked toward the edge of the lot, scanning the swirling white air for any sign of him. Then I saw a shape near the side of the building slumped against the wall. I hurried over, slipping once on the icy pavement. Elias was curled onto his side, shaking uncontrollably, his beard coated in frost. "Sir," I said, kneeling beside him, "can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto my face. "Too cold," he whispered, voice faint as the snow drifting around us. I pulled him upright and wrapped my scarf around his neck again. It felt like wrapping fabric around a block of ice. When I placed my hand on his shoulder, he suddenly grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. His fingers dug in not in fear, but desperation. His mouth trembled as he whispered, "You remind me of my son." The words hit me harder than the wind. He had never spoken this many syllables to me. I didn't know what to say. My breath caught not from the cold, but from something heavier, something echoing inside my chest. Before I could respond, he closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall, chest rising slowly, painfully. I stayed with him for several minutes, shielding him from the wind until his breathing steadied. Something in his expression changed. His eyes opened again, and for the first time I saw tears welling in them, reflecting the faint neon glow from the vending machine. He wasn't just cold. He was grieving. I didn't know what or who he had lost, but the sorrow in his eyes felt ancient. As he stared toward the mountains in the distance, it was as if he was looking through time, searching for something he'd never find again. That was the moment I realized I didn't just feel pity for him. I felt connected to him in a way I couldn't explain. A lonely man with nothing left, holding on to warmth offered by someone who barely had any to spare. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of everything that would follow. Because sometimes the people you save are the ones who end up saving you. The night Elias disappeared was colder than usual. A strange kind of cold that made the air feel heavier, as if something were pressing down on the whole town. I remember stepping out of the store during my break, rubbing my hands together for warmth and letting the automatic doors slide shut behind me. The vending machine hummed faintly, its neon glow flickering, casting long blue streaks across the snow. I glanced toward the familiar spot where he always sat, expecting to see his hunched figure, the way he curled inward to keep whatever warmth he could. but the space was empty. At first, I thought maybe he had shifted closer to the wall trying to escape the wind. I stepped forward, scanning the sidewalk and the parking lot. Nothing. Then I noticed the coffee cup I had given him earlier sitting on the ground tipped slightly, and when I picked it up I felt the warmth still clinging to the paper. That meant he had been there recently, not long ago. The snow around the cup was disturbed too, footprints partially filled by drifting flakes. A tiny coil of unease tightened inside me. I walked toward the edge of the building, checking the narrow alley beside the store. Only blowing snow and trash bins greeted me. The wind cut across my face, sharp enough to sting. The forecast had warned of a fast-moving storm rolling in overnight. If Elias was out there alone and the temperatures dropping fast with the wind beginning to howl, he wouldn't stand a chance. I hurried back inside and asked my coworker Trevor if he had seen the old man. Trevor shrugged and said, "Maybe he moved on. They do that. Don't get attached, man." The way he said they made something inside me clench. I pulled up the security footage from the outside cameras, fast-forwarding through hours of footage. I saw customers, delivery trucks drifting snow, stray dogs, but not Elias. It was as if he had vanished into the storm. I grabbed my coat again, ignoring Trevor's raised eyebrows, and stepped back outside. I checked behind the dumpsters near the gas pumps around the bus stop across the street. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind rising, scraping against the metal roof like fingernails. As I stood there breathing clouds into the freezing air, the weight of helplessness pressed on my chest. I wasn't his family. I didn't even know his last name. But I couldn't shake the image of him shivering the night before, whispering that I reminded him of his son. Something about those words had settled inside me, stubborn and unmoving. When I finally walked back into the store, snow clinging to my shoes and hair, Trevor snorted. "I told you, man. These people disappear all the time. Don't make it your problem." His tone stung more than I expected. Maybe because part of me feared he was right. Maybe because I was tired of people pretending not to see suffering right in front of them. During my shift, I kept glancing out the window, hoping to see Elias's hunched silhouette returning, shuffling slowly toward the vending machine light. But the night stayed empty. The storm thickened, burying the world in white. When my shift finally ended, I trudged home through the snow, feeling the cold cling to me like a second skin. When I opened the door, Ava ran into my arms. Her hair smelled like soap, and her tiny hands were warm against my cheeks. "Daddy," she said, her eyes wide and soft. "Did you see the old man tonight? The one you bring food to?" I hesitated before answering. "No, sweetie, not tonight." She tilted her head, thinking in that serious way she had. "Does he have someone to take care of him?" The question pierced deeper than she knew. I swallowed a breath that felt too heavy. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I really don't know." She wrapped her arms around my neck as if she understood more than her age should allow. I held her tightly, the cold still lingering on my clothes, and felt an ache grow in my chest. I didn't know that the next time I heard Elias's name it would come from the mouths of lawyers in long coats, and everything I believed about the man sitting beside the vending machine would shatter into something far bigger than I could imagine. The night after Elias disappeared, the store felt unusually quiet, as if the storm outside had muted everything it touched. Snow pressed against the windows in thick waves, and every time the automatic doors opened, a sharp gust of cold sliced through the aisles. I kept glancing toward the vending machine, half expecting to see him sitting there again, wrapped in my old scarf, hands curled around a cup of coffee. But the spot remained empty. The absence settled in my stomach like a stone. Around 9 p.m., I was restocking the beverage cooler, kneeling on the cold tile as the machine hummed beside me. Customers milled quietly through the aisles, bundled in heavy coats, their boots leaving wet tracks on the floor. The bell above the door chimed, and I instinctively lifted my head, expecting another late-night traveler or a couple seeking snacks before returning to the storm. Instead, headlights flared through the window. A black SUV rolled to a stop outside its tinted windows, reflecting nothing but the swirling snow. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. The doors opened and 3 men in dark wool coats stepped out, followed by 2 more wearing matching black suits and discreet earpieces. They didn't move like people running errands. They moved with purpose, their polished shoes crunching through snow as they approached the store. The customers turned to watch as they entered, their presence shifting the atmosphere instantly. Conversations stopped. A bag of chips slipped from someone's hand. Even Trevor, lounging behind the counter scrolling through his phone, sat up straight. I stood slowly from the cooler, wiping condensation from my hands onto my apron. The tallest of the men stepped forward. He had silver hair, combed neatly back, and wore thin glasses that made him look both sharp and unapproachable. His gaze swept the store once before landing squarely on me. "Are you Michael Reyes?" he asked. Voice steady, formal, unmistakably authoritative. I swallowed. "Yes, sir." "That's me?" The man gave a small nod as if confirming something on an internal checklist. "My name is Daniel Whitford. I'm an attorney with the firm Whitford, Harlan and Green. We need to speak with you regarding Mr. Elias Mercer." The name hit me like a blow. For a moment I could only stare at him, the words slipping through my mind like water. "Mercer," I repeated too quietly. Elias had a last name. He wasn't just the quiet old man outside the vending machine. He'd had an identity, a history, a life before the cold swallowed him. I knew him only as Elias," I whispered. A murmur spread among the customers. Whitford stepped closer. "Mr. Mercer passed away yesterday morning." My knees weakened. I had to steady myself against the cooler door. A strange ringing began in my ears, drowning out everything except the attorney's calm, practiced voice. Elias was gone. The man who whispered that I reminded him of his son. The man whose eyes held oceans of loss. The man who spent his nights curled beside a vending machine because he had nowhere else to go. I realized I had been holding my breath. "I'm sorry, I managed. I didn't know he was sick. His health had been declining for some time," Whitford replied gently, though his professionalism never slipped. "He spoke of you in his final instructions. We're here to ask if you will sign a witness verification stating that you interacted with him regularly. It's needed for legal confirmation. Interact with him." I blinked. "I brought him food sometimes. Coffee. Talked to him, I guess. Why would any of that matter?" Whitford exchanged a brief glance with the man beside him, then looked back at me. "Because Mr. Mercer named you in his final instructions." The air seemed to stop moving. Trevor uttered a soft, "What?" from behind the counter. A woman in aisle 2 turned fully to face us. I felt every pair of eyes in the store drilling into my back. "I think there must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely audible. "He didn't even know my last name." "He did," Whitford said. "Mr. Mercer knew more about you than you realize, and he made specific requests concerning you." My thoughts scattered. Elias, the man shivering beside the vending machine, had known my last name, had gone to lawyers, had made requests. None of it made sense. "We understand this is unexpected," Whitford continued. "But we're prepared to take you to our office tonight if you're willing. It's important that we review the documents with you as soon as possible." I didn't speak, couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at the attorney as a quiet storm rose inside me. Questions, shock, a sudden strange grief, and beneath it all, something else. Something like fear, because I got the feeling that whatever Elias had left behind, it wasn't small. Michael Whitford said softly, "Mr. Mercer wanted you informed immediately." I exhaled shakily. "Okay," I said at last. "I'll come with you." And as I followed them out into the snowy night, I had no idea that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The drive to the law office felt unreal, as though the world outside the SUV existed behind a layer of frosted glass. I sat in the back seat between 2 security guards, their silence heavy, professional, and immovable. The headlights carved narrow tunnels through the swirling Montana snow, and with every mile my confusion deepened. Elias had died, and somehow he had left something for me. For me, a convenience store clerk barely holding his life together. I pressed my palms against my knees to stop them from shaking. The attorney Whitford sat in the front passenger seat reading over a stack of papers illuminated by the SUV's overhead light. Every so often he underlined something with a fountain pen. The smooth efficiency with which he worked made me feel even more out of place. Eventually, we pulled into the underground garage of a tall building downtown, far from my neighborhood of faded duplexes and flickering streetlights. When the elevator doors opened into a sleek marble lobby, I felt the air shift. The space smelled faintly of leather and cedar, with abstract art lining the walls and the kind of lighting that made everything look expensive. I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in a paneled wall. Tired face, unshaven, jaw hair mussed by wind aprons still dusted with powdered sugar from the donut display. I looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong movie. Whitford led the way to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy city. The table was a long stretch of polished walnut, the kind that cost more than my car. My throat tightened. I didn't belong here, but inside the room, one man and one woman were already waiting. The man sat rigidly in his chair, tapping his fingers in agitation. He was maybe in his late 20s with sharp cheekbones and carefully styled hair. His suit was too expensive to be subtle. The woman beside him, slightly older, wore a dark burgundy coat and held herself with a coolness that came from a lifetime of always getting the better seat at the table. They both stared at me the moment I walked in, two pairs of eyes narrowing in careful, controlled disdain. The man scoffed under his breath. "This is him? Seriously." Whitford cleared his throat. "Mr. Reyes, this is Cole Mercer, Mr. Elias Mercer's grandson, and this is Miss Linton, his legal representative." Cole leaned forward, studying me as if I were a stain on the table he couldn't remove. "My grandfather talked to a lot of people," he said. "That doesn't mean he meant anything special by it." I felt my cheeks warm, though I wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or irritation. I had no idea what I was being accused of, but the hostility in his tone made my skin crawl. Whitford gestured toward one of the seats. "Please, Michael, have a seat. We have much to go over." I sat slowly, trying not to touch anything for fear of staining it. Whitford opened a thick folder stamped with a raised gold seal and adjusted his glasses. "We're here to execute the components of Mr. Mercer's will. Before his passing, he created a series of legally binding instructions that we are obligated to follow." Cole muttered something to his attorney, but I couldn't make out the words. My heartbeat quickened. Whitford continued. "Mr. Mercer lived his final years without family contact. However, he maintained full mental capacity as verified by multiple physicians and a notarized video statement. All decisions documented in this will were made knowingly and without coercion." He paused, then looked straight at me. "And in these decisions, Mr. Mercer named you Michael." I swallowed hard. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "I didn't know him, not really. I just gave him coffee." "And dignity," Whitford corrected gently. He flipped to the first page. "Mr. Mercer was once the majority owner of Mercer Energy Technologies, a company specializing in renewable power solutions here in Montana. Nearly 2 decades ago, after the tragic loss of his wife and adult son in a vehicle accident, he withdrew from public life. According to records, he suffered profound depression and made attempts to reconnect with his grandson, Cole." Whitford's eyes flicked briefly toward the young man across the table, who stiffened. These attempts were not reciprocated. Cole slammed his palm on the table. "You don't know anything about me." Whitford didn't even flinch. "I know exactly what the documents show." He returned to the will. "Mr. Mercer believed his wealth had become a burden, one that disconnected him from the values he held dear. He gradually gave up ownership, stepping away from the company and, over time, from society as well. He lived the last 18 years without a home." I stared at the table, trying to imagine the gentle, trembling man outside my store as someone who once commanded boardrooms. Someone who lost everything. Someone whose grief hollowed him out. Whitford turned another page. In his final months, Mr. Mercer documented several observations about his daily interactions. One repeated entry concerns a man he encountered regularly who treated him as a human being without pity or disgust. "That man, Mr. Reyes, was you." My breath caught. "I just did what anyone would do." Cole laughed sharply. "Anyone. No one in this room believes that." Whitford raised a hand to silence him. "Mr. Mercer left very specific requests. First, he left you $400,000 in liquid assets." My body went numb. 400,000? That was no. That couldn't be real. Second, Whitford continued, he left you ownership of his cabin property near Bearclaw Lake. My pulse thudded in my ears. A cabin. Property. For me, why? Third, he said, lifting a small sealed envelope, he left you a letter. His final personal message. My mouth felt dry. I couldn't form words. Fourth, he said, placing a brass key on the table, he left you access to a private safe. What is contained within it will be revealed at the appropriate time. Cole shot to his feet. "Absolutely not," he yelled. "This is insane." He was confused, manipulated, probably coerced by this clerk. The word hit me like a slap. Clerk, as if that was all I was allowed to be. Miss Linton leaned toward Cole, urging him to sit, but he yanked his arm away. "I'm contesting this," he snapped. "You can't seriously expect me to accept that my grandfather left a stranger more than he left his own blood." Whitford closed the folder calmly. "Mr. Mercer anticipated your reaction. There is a video recording verifying his intentions." He pressed a button on a small remote, and a monitor on the wall blinked to life. Suddenly, Elias filled the screen. Clean-shaven, dressed in a plain sweater, sitting upright in an office chair. His eyes were clearer than I had ever seen them. "If you are watching this," he said, "then my time has ended." His voice was steady, though soft. "I have lived many years in the cold, not because I lacked shelter, but because I lacked reason to return to warmth." Cole shifted uncomfortably. Elias continued. "I met a man named Michael Reyes. He offered me warmth without expecting anything. He reminded me of the man I once hoped my grandson would become." Cole's jaw clenched. "He treated me like a human being. For that, I leave him what remains of my personal legacy." The screen froze. Silence fell over the room. Heavy. Final. I sat there unable to breathe normally, as if a weight had been lifted and replaced all at once. Fear mixed with shock. Gratitude tangled with disbelief. I felt small and enormous at the same time. Michael Whitford said softly, "Sir, Mercer trusted you with more than assets. He trusted you to carry the final piece of his life story." I exhaled shakily, finally finding my voice. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," Whitford said. "He chose you for a reason." And in that moment I realized my life was no longer just mine. It was tied to a man who had once sat shivering beside a vending machine and to secrets I still didn't understand. Driving to the cabin felt like crossing into someone else's life, a version of Montana I had only ever seen in postcards sold at the front counter of the store. The road wound through thick pine forests, their branches heavy with snow, and the air grew quieter the farther I traveled. It was as if the world itself recognized the property I was approaching, lowering its voice in respect. Bearclaw Lake appeared suddenly through the trees frozen over its surface, reflecting the pale winter sky like a sheet of glass. And there, perched just above the shoreline, was the cabin Elias had left me. It was small, but beautifully built, made of dark timber, with a stone chimney that rose proudly against the white landscape. Smoke no longer drifted from it, but I could imagine how it once did, curling into the sky on cold mornings. I parked the borrowed SUV and stepped out the snow, crunching under my boots. For a long moment I just stared, unable to reconcile this quiet place with the image of the frail man huddled beside the vending machine. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and distant wood smoke from some other cabin across the lake. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, warmth washed over me, not the physical kind, because the place was freezing, but the kind that comes from stepping into someone's memories. The interior was simple, but full of life. A bookshelf against the wall sagged under the weight of old novels, history books, and journals. A thick wool blanket lay draped across a leather armchair that faced a stone fireplace. A faded rug covered the wooden floor. Every detail looked like it had belonged to a man who once loved silence, who once sought refuge in words and firelight. I walked deeper inside, brushing my fingers over furniture polished by years of use. On a low table were framed photographs. One showed a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile standing in front of a small bakery. Another captured a younger Elias holding a boy, likely his son, near a riverbank. My chest tightened. Here was proof of a life lived before tragedy, a life he had never spoken of to me. Beside the photo sat a wooden box carved with swirling patterns. I opened it and found harmonicas neatly arranged inside, each worn from years of use. I held one up and wondered if he had ever played music to soothe himself during the years after losing everything. My heart felt too full, as if grief were expanding inside me for a man I barely knew, yet knew enough to mourn. I set the harmonica down and turned toward the desk against the wall. A brass key lay on top, the same one Whitford had placed before me in the conference room. My pulse quickened. This was meant for the safe. The safe Elias had described as something I would only be ready to open once I reached this cabin. I found the safe hidden behind a loose panel in the bedroom closet. Not large, but heavy, made of old steel with scratches along the surface. Kneeling before it, I slid the key into the slot. It turned with a satisfying click, and the door eased open. I expected money or documents. But when I pulled out the contents and began to read, the air seemed to shift. Inside the safe were folders packed with papers, legal documents, bank statements, corporate memos, and handwritten notes. And every one of them pointed in the same direction: Cole Mercer. The first folder contained evidence of financial misconduct, unauthorized transfers, gambling debts disguised as business expenses, loans taken from Mercer Energy using forged signatures. My hands trembled as I turned page after page. Elias had not left society merely because of grief. He had been pushed aside by the very person who should have protected him. I found a second folder containing letters from Elias to Cole, attempts to reconnect after the deaths of his wife and son. The letters were full of regret, longing, and hope, but they had all been returned unopened. One envelope bore the faint mark of snow. He must have dropped it somewhere trying to deliver it himself. My throat tightened. I then found a stack of documents detailing a plan Elias had created long before he met me to reclaim the Mercer name from the inside. Not for power or wealth, but to ensure that the company he had built would not be used as a playground for his grandson's selfishness. The last item was a letter addressed to me. Hands shaking, I opened it. "Michael," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. You gave me something I had not known in many years: dignity. You looked at me as if I were still worth something. I watched you with your daughter through the store windows. I saw in you the father I once was before grief turned me into a ghost. You gave me warmth without knowing my name. For that reason, I entrust you with the truth I could not carry alone." Inside these folders is the story I could not bring myself to tell. Cole's choices were not born of malice alone, but of neglect of being raised in a world where wealth replaced love. I blame myself for that, but I also believe he must face the consequences of the path he chose. If you choose to take up what I leave behind, you will not be alone. Whitford will guide you, and the cabin will shelter you. Fix what I could not. My vision blurred. Snow pressed hard against the windows, wind howling outside as if the world itself grieved with him. I was no longer just a clerk or a struggling father. I had become the keeper of a man's final confession, a legacy heavy enough to break anyone unprepared. Yet, somehow, standing there in that quiet cabin, I knew I would not walk away from it. Not after everything he had survived. Not after everything he had trusted me with. I wiped my eyes, closed the folder, and stepped outside onto the porch. Snow drifted down in soft flakes. The lake reflected the faint moonlight, and for the first time since Elias died, I whispered into the cold air, I promise I won't fail you." I spent the night in the cabin, sitting at the small wooden desk, the folders spread out before me like pieces of a life that had been shattered long before I ever met Elias. I read until my eyes burned, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of what I was learning. Every document, every letter, every number illuminated a truth that twisted my stomach. Elias had been pushed out of his own life by the grandson he loved. Cole hadn't simply neglected him. He had orchestrated his disappearance from the company and, in many ways, from the world. As dawn broke over Bear Claw Lake, soft light spilling across the snow in pale streaks, I felt the cold deepen inside my chest. I wasn't just holding evidence. I was holding a man's broken heart. Around mid-morning, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on snow outside the cabin. I stiffened instantly. The wind had been the only sound for hours. Through the window, I saw a black SUV, sleeker than the one the attorneys drove, with the tinted windows dark enough to hide the souls inside, pulling up the driveway. I closed the folders and slipped the most incriminating documents into the desk drawer, just as heavy footsteps made the porch creak. The door burst open without a knock. Cole strode in first, wearing a charcoal coat and a furious expression that made him look older than he was. Two large men followed their presence, filling the cabin with a pressure that tightened my throat. Behind them came Miss Linton, her eyes sharp and assessing. Cole slammed the door shut, snow scattering across the floor. "You think you can steal my family's legacy?" he snapped, his voice trembling with a blend of rage and disbelief. I forced myself to stay calm. "I didn't steal anything, Cole. Your grandfather left his estate to me. Legally." "Legally?" Cole barked out a laugh that held no humor. "He was out of his mind, a homeless old man rotting on the streets, and you expect me to believe he made rational decisions? You manipulated him." One of the bodyguards stepped forward slightly as if waiting for a signal. I lifted my hands a little, palms outward. I didn't manipulate him. I gave him coffee, a scarf, conversation. "Exactly," Cole hissed. "You preyed on someone vulnerable." His accusation stung, but not because it was true, because it showed how little he understood the man he was condemning. "Did you even visit him?" I asked quietly. In the last 18 years, the question hit him harder than I intended. His jaw clenched. "That's none of your business. It became my business the moment you barged into this cabin," I said. "You want to talk about manipulation? Look at these." I reached into the drawer and pulled out a handful of papers, just enough to make my point, not enough to reveal everything. "These are records of unauthorized loans, forged signatures, and debts your grandfather paid to clean up your mistakes." Cole's face drained of color. "Where did you get those?" "From the safe your grandfather entrusted to me." "Those documents are confidential corporate files," Ms. Linton interjected sharply. "Possession of them is a felony. Funny, I said so is forging signatures and stealing millions from a family business." The cabin fell silent, except for the popping of ice outside the window as the lake shifted beneath its frozen shell. Cole's breath quickened. The mask of entitlement he wore began to crack. "You don't understand," he said, but the edge in his voice faltered. "My grandfather abandoned me. He withdrew from the company." He didn't abandon you," I said firmly. "He wrote you hundreds of letters that you never opened. He blamed himself for losing you. Even after losing his wife and his son, he hoped you would come back." Cole blinked rapidly. The fury on his face twisted into something more fragile, more wounded, though just for a second before he straightened again. "This isn't over," he said. "A clerk like you can't hold on to his legacy. You'll fold, you'll break, and when you do, I'll be there to take back what's mine." I stepped closer, not intimidated by his height or his expensive coat. "Your grandfather didn't give me his legacy because of my job. He gave it to me because I treated him like a person, something you didn't do." The bodyguards moved slightly, but Miss Linton raised a hand signaling them to remain still. She studied me with an expression somewhere between calculation and curiosity. "Mr. Mercer's will is airtight," she admitted. "Even if we contest it, the process could take years, and the evidence—" Her gaze drifted to the documents in my hand. "Does not favor your position, Cole." Cole turned on her angrily. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I am," she said calmly, "but I deal in reality, not tantrums." His face reddened humiliation mixing with rage. "You think you've won," he snarled at me, "but you have no idea what this world is like. Power eats people alive, and when it eats you, I'll be the one stepping over your bones." He stormed toward the door, shoving aside one of his own bodyguards. The men followed him out onto the porch, their boots thudding heavily. Ms. Linton paused at the threshold, fixing me with a level stare. "Be careful," she said. "People like Cole, they don't lose gracefully." Then she left, closing the door behind her. I stood in the sudden silence, my chest heaving as though I had run miles. Outside, the snow was falling again, softer this time, and the SUV's engine rumbled to life. I watched it back down the driveway, disappearing into the trees, leaving deep tire tracks that the snowfall quickly began to fill. I sank into the armchair beside the fireplace, the weight of what had happened settling over me. I wasn't just up against a spoiled heir. I was up against a man raised in privilege, accustomed to winning, desperate enough to destroy anything that threatened his image. And Elias had left me not only his assets, but his unfinished battle. I picked up the harmonica from the table, running my thumb along the worn metal. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled long and low. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet cabin, "I won't let you down, Elias." And for the first time, I felt the resolve not just to honor him, but to fight for him. In the weeks that followed the confrontation at the cabin, my life shifted into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and strangely natural, as if I had stepped into a role I was always meant to fill, but never knew existed. I split my time between the cabin and my home with Ava, and for the first time since she was born, I wasn't counting pennies or praying for a miracle every time she used her inhaler. The $400,000 deposited into my account cleared every debt I had ever carried. I paid off past due medical bills, caught up on rent, and even managed to repair my car, which had been surviving on hope and duct tape for longer than I cared to admit. Ava noticed the change first. "Daddy, why aren't you tired anymore?" she asked one morning, her hair still mussed from sleep. I pulled her into a hug and whispered, "Because someone helped us, sweetheart. Someone who believed we deserved better." At the cabin, the once quiet rooms became places of reflection rather than grief. I sorted through Elias's documents with a new sense of purpose, working closely with Whitford to ensure that Mercer Energy Technologies shifted toward ethical stewardship rather than personal gain. We created oversight committees, restructured board responsibilities, and implemented new safeguards. As for Cole, he made noise-threatening lawsuits appearing on business podcasts to paint me as a manipulative stranger, but the evidence spoke for itself. Eventually, even he retreated, swallowed by the weight of his own missteps. It wasn't victory I felt. It was relief. Meanwhile, something else began to stir inside me, a desire to honor Elias not just in legal ways, but in human ones. His memory wasn't meant to be sealed away in courtrooms or board meetings. It was meant to live where he had lived his final days among the forgotten. So one bitterly cold evening, the kind of night that reminded me of the vending machine glow and the scarf I wrapped around his shoulders, I brewed a large pot of coffee, filled a crate with foam cups, and drove to the parking lot outside the convenience store. I set up a small folding table near the vending machine that had once been his refuge. At first, no one came. People noticed, but hesitated, unsure if I was selling something or starting a campaign. But then an older man with a tattered coat approached. His beard was streaked with gray and his steps were slow. I saw in his eyes the same exhausted quiet I had seen in Elias. "Is this free?" he asked, gesturing toward the coffee. "Yes," I said gently. "It's for anyone who needs warmth." He hesitated, then accepted a cup. His hands shook slightly as he held it. Word spread slowly over the next few days, and soon more people appeared, men, women, even a few teens drawn by the offer of something warm in a world that often felt cold. One night, as a small crowd gathered, Ava tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, Can we keep a special place for Mr. Elias? So he doesn't get lonely. Something in her small voice cracked me open. I knelt beside her, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. Yes, I said, we can. The next day, I returned to the vending machine with a small wooden plaque I had carved in the cabin. The words were simple: Elias's spot where kindness begins. I mounted it on the wall right beside the vending machine. When I stepped back, the plaque seemed to glow beneath the neon light as if the old machine had accepted the offering. That evening, as I handed out coffee, I noticed a man sitting at the base of the vending machine. New, unfamiliar, but wearing the same kind of tired expression that felt painfully familiar. His shoes were thin, his coat was frayed. He watched me with a mix of caution and curiosity. I poured a cup and walked toward him, feeling the weight of memory with each step. Evening, I said softly. It's freezing tonight. Here, warm your hands. He accepted the cup slowly, almost suspiciously, then glanced up at me. Why are you kind to me? He asked, the same words, the same trembling vulnerability that echoed from a night I would never forget. My breath caught. I felt Elias in that moment, felt the memory of his cold fingers gripping my wrist, heard his voice whispering through time. I knelt so I could look the man in the eyes. Because someone once taught me, I said gently, that kindness can save a life. The man closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the steam from the coffee. Snow drifted silently around us, settling on the wooden plaque above his head. I stood there with him, letting the moment stretch, letting it warm the cold air between us. As more people approached the table, seeking warmth, seeking connection, I realized that this was the true legacy Elias had left me. Not money, not property, not a battle with coal, but the understanding that the smallest gesture, a cup of coffee, a scarf, a moment of compassion, could ripple outward and touch lives in ways we never expect. That night, as Ava slipped her small hand into mine and leaned her head against my arm, I whispered into the winter air, "Thank you, Elias, for everything, and for the first time in years the world didn't feel so cold." As you reach the end of this story, I want to invite you to pause for a moment, not for me, not for the channel, but for yourself. Because somewhere in this world right now, there is someone sitting alone on a sidewalk or standing beside a vending machine in the cold or waiting quietly at the edge of a room full of people too busy to notice them. Someone who used to have a life, a name, a family, dreams, and maybe even a fortune until life took more than they could bear. Elias Mercer's story may feel extraordinary, almost unbelievable, but the truth is that the heart of it is happening every single day. Not the millions of dollars, not the legal battles, not the hidden cabins or secret safes, but the part that matters most. The part where a human being who has nothing left still hopes to be seen just once by someone who cares. Michael did not change Elias's life with money or power. He changed it with a warm drink, a broken sandwich, and a few minutes of humanity in a world that often forgets how to be human. And ironically, that simple kindness came back to him in a form he never expected, not as a reward but as a reminder that goodness has a long memory. The world teaches us to measure success by what we earn, what we own, what we become. But stories like this remind us that the true measure of a life is who we lift up, who we comfort, and who we choose to see when everyone else looks away. Maybe you've helped someone who never got the chance to thank you. Maybe you've been the one overlooked, wishing someone would notice your struggle. Maybe you've walked by a stranger and felt that tug inside your chest, the one that whispers stop. Just for a moment. This could matter. We never know which small act becomes the turning point in someone else's life. It might be the cup of coffee you hand to a tired cashier. It might be the gentle word you offer to someone who looks like they're carrying too much. It might be the smile you give a person who seems invisible to the world. And sometimes that act doesn't come back to us as money or property or miracles. Sometimes it comes back in the form of peace, perspective, or the quiet knowledge that for one fragile moment you made someone's burden lighter. If this story touched you, it found you for a reason. Maybe it's reminding you of the kindness you've already given. Maybe it's nudging you toward a kindness you've been meaning to show. Or maybe it's simply telling you that you matter, that your heart still has the power to shape the world around you in ways you cannot yet see. So, if you feel inspired, share this story with someone who might need it. Leave a comment telling us about a small act of kindness that changed you. And if you want more stories that bring hope, healing, and a deeper understanding of the quiet miracles around us, subscribe and stay with this channel. Because here we believe something simple but powerful kindness never disappears. It echoes. It grows. It circles back when you least expect it. And it just might change a life, including your own.